Our next guest on Unpluggered is Zac Dawson. Played for the Saints through the halcyon period of 2009 to 2011, back-to-back grand finals, or effectively 3 grand finals over a 2-year period. Came from the Hawks, where he spent 5 years in the system there, and then went on to Fremantle and played in another grand final in 2013 during what was a good period for that football club under Ross Lyon. Zac, thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate it, boys. Thanks for having me.
Now, I guess we'll go back to sort of where it all began. Obviously, you came via the Calder Cannons. Can you sort of take us through how you arrived at Hawthorn and what those early days were like? I know we focus mainly on the Saints, but obviously your journey that eventually led you to us. You got to Hawthorn at a time that wasn't great for them, but it wasn't long until they were on the right path.
Yeah, look, my first 5 years of footy was chalk and cheese in comparison to the last 9 years. Grew up in Mooney Ponds, Essendon area, went to Essendon Grammar, played most of my footy at school footy at Penley and Essendon Grammar, and split time between there and Calder Cannons, and got drafted as a 17-year-old. Back then you were able to get drafted as a bottom major, so I was under 80 kilos when I got drafted, wringing wet. That was probably putting a few kilos on what I actually really weighed, and was just a really kind of aggressive ruckman at that time. I was, back in those days, 198 centimeters was, Goodsey was rucking at that point. Jason Blake was doing a bit of ruck. So it was almost like they were looking for the ruckman at that size. And so I got drafted as a ruckman forward out of school and Calder after a big year. We won the flag at under 18 level, and got drafted to the club I supported as a kid. So I ended up living every kid's dream, getting drafted to the club that they supported, and walking into the change rooms with the heroes that you grew up supporting, like Shane Crawford and John Barker, and shared a locker next to him, which was a big eye opener from the beginning. But looking back on it, at 17, it was just such an immature age for me. Like, walking into a club, there wasn't much expectation on the early days, but walking into a club at 17, unless you're mentally prepared, it takes a lot to kind of really grow up. And back in those days, leadership groups and all that sort of thing weren't as massive, and so you were kind of left to your own device for the first little bit to try and grow up yourself. And I'd probably look back and say my first 5 years I probably wasn't at the level required, whether I believed in myself enough, whether it was I thought I was working hard, but I wasn't. In saying that, it was an enjoyable period, and I learned more probably in that 5 years than the remaining 9. So it was pretty special.
Zac, you had some pretty well documented, struggles through those first couple of years at Hawthorn. Obviously, some big games with Anthony Rocca and Nathan Thompson, and then you go back to the VFL with Box Hill, and you kick bags of 4 or 8 and whatever in the VFL. Was that a really difficult period for you, and how did you deal with that kind of the external noise?
Yeah, it was difficult because, as I said, I got drafted as a forward and a ruckman. I was kind of brought in and played at that stage. I played reserves. So the twos. As a forward, I think I won best and fairest goal kicking for the first 2 years. And then I think it was the last game of the year of my 3rd year, or maybe it might have been the last of my 2nd year, that I played one game at fullback. I played on Sav Rocca, and it's funny that Anthony Rocca was where I had my worst day, but I played on Sav Rocca and he kicked 8 on me, and I was like, God, I'm not playing fullback ever again, And so I thought it was just going to be a one-off, but then due to injury, and I think Jonathan Hay was going through some struggles at that point, and so I trained the whole preseason as a backman, and then ended up, got a crack at it by the end of that next season, and played, I think, the last game of the year, and was playing pretty solid footy. And then into the next year, I played the first 12 games, as you said, and had some pretty tough times, just because as a youngster in a different game. Back then it was very one-on-one orientated. You're playing on the big hulking forwards. I think played at my first few games. It was Richo, Matthew Stafford, Barry Hall, Nathan Thompson, Matthew Lloyd, Favola. Guys,
small guys.
Yeah, just guys that you just were pretty good. And so and for me, I was still learning, and I was still very, very raw as a prospect, as a backman, and kind of got thrown into that. And as you said, Hawthorn weren't going that well at that point, and so I kind of was left to grow up pretty quickly and go through some pretty horrendous sort of things as a young kid should have to go through.
And as some would know, that next 2 seasons with Hawthorn, you didn't end up playing any matches for them, and obviously playing a bit of VFL or as VFL reserves, as you were saying as well, that sort of thing. And did you know that maybe the St Kilda was looking at you while you're playing the VFL a little bit, or did anyone approach you?
Not at all. I played those my last 2 years. I started to play quite consistent, good VFL footy, and it was just sometimes it comes down to a lot of luck and a lot of opportunity. And at that point, by 2008, they won the grand final. So 2007, 2008, the back line was locked in. There was hardly any injuries. There was a lot of continuity, and there was just no opportunity for me. And so even though I was playing good footy, there was just it wasn't there, and so I wasn't able to get in there and prove myself again. And so after 2 years in the wilderness, the club kind of just had to say, well, we'll just have to make a call, and probably at that, looking back, it was probably the right call that they made, because after 2 years of going through that kind of torment during that little patch when I was playing, the mental side of things really caught up with me by the end. It was really hard to get myself going to grounds and going to the VFL and getting absolutely heckled and violated,
verbally every week by supporters, my own supporters, from living through, having to relive those couple of games where I got, manhandled, and it was like, I started to question why would I want to play footy anymore? Why am I doing this? I'm meant to be living my dream, and I'm sitting here in the VFL just absolutely copying it every single week when I go out in the town, when I go out with the boys, and it's just like, what's going on here? And so by the end of the 5th year, I was just mentally worn down. And so when it got to that point that I was delisted, it was almost a sense of relief at that point. So it's weird. As weird as it sounds, like it was really like a pressure release at that point, and that's how bad it had gotten. And so it was a real turning point.
I think that's a massive eye opener for people as well. When people make their comments on social media or they go to the footy and yell over the fence, that you are talking to real people. It's remarkable how quickly that changed for you. I mean, you not taken in the national draft, you go in the rookie draft to St Kilda at pick 13, and then you play round 1 and you effectively play every game. I think you missed 2 through suspension, but basically from start all the way through in that first year, your first game for the Saints is against Sydney. We don't lose until obviously round 20 of that particular season. So can you take us through that transformation from basically rock bottom after Hawthorn, getting the call from the Saints, and then basically not looking back as a defender the whole way through?
Yeah, it was definitely a sliding doors moment in my life. As you said, like I was ready to move on. I was ready to focus on a much more positive part of my life, because I've always studied. I've always had a passion to improve myself off field. So I was always studying the whole time. So I was ready to kind of go, all right, well, let's get back to uni. Let's graduate. Let's finish my degree. Start feeling good about myself, because footy wasn't giving me that satisfaction anymore. And so I was comfortable with that decision. I was disappointed, but I was comfortable that it was probably the best thing for my mental state at that time. And had signed up back into uni, re-enrolled, and was ready to go, and then got a phone call, of a random number one day, and it was Ross. And I picked up the phone, and I was like, pretty much, what do you want? I had no idea why I'd be ringing, and he's like,
Steve Silvagni and I have been having discussions, and we want to bring you in and have a chat and see where your head's at and what you're thinking and whether you'd be interested in playing footy next year. And in no uncertain terms, I pretty much said, no, I'm not interested anymore. I'm kind of got to the point where I'm mentally checked out. And I think he was a bit like taken aback that I was saying no. But left it at that. And he's like, well, he goes, how about I'll call you back in a week's time, speak to mum and dad, and I'll give you a call in a week and just see where you're at. He goes, but the offer's there, and we want to, we think there's something there, and left it with me. And so I kind of then had a decision to make again. I was like, well, do I want to go back into, as a rookie, back then there was no guarantees to play. So you're sitting behind, the senior list, and the only way you can play is through long-term injury. So I could have just been submitting myself to another year of just not playing and uncertainty and wasting, not finishing my degree and not getting on to that next chapter. So that was where, as I said, it was a sliding doors moment to go, well, what do I want to do? And mum and dad were probably the big ones in saying, like, in 20 years time, if you don't say yes to this, you're always going to be one of those guys sitting in the pub or, having a meal with the boys saying, I could have been this and I could have tried this if I had just said yes. But you don't want to be that person. And so when they laid it out like that, I was like, it's definitely the right decision. And if I don't have a crack at it, I'd be disappointed in myself down the track. So he called back a week later, and I pretty much said I'm in. And from that point, got me into the footy club. Had some pretty serious one-on-one meetings with him, just between the two of us, and it was opening up and he was pretty clear in making me understand why I didn't make it and what my deficiencies were, and not trying to spin any bullcrap with me and say, no, this is where you went wrong and this is what you need to understand and this is where you have to get better. And so really clear on where my growth areas were, which is what I probably needed, and to have the raw truth hit home right from the beginning. And I think when I opened right up to him and told him everything, I think he was a bit taken aback, like, well, I'm fully invested. I'm willing to tell you everything. There's no BS with me. There's no lies, which he would have known because I've probably overindulged. And from that point, that's probably why we still have a good relationship now, is that I was always completely transparent with him the whole way through. And then as you said, like I went into that pre-season really focused on just building my body, being positive, and just having a real crack at throw at the stumps. And so I went back and trained hard, put on a fair bit of size over that summer, and then went into pre-season feeling really good, played quite well in the pre-season games. And then the last game, I think we went to Port Adelaide, and I think Maxie Hutchinson did his calf in that last game. It was like a pretty bad one. It was like an 8-weeker maybe. And another moment is the opportunity. It was like, that's the moment where things changed, and got the call up, played round one. And as you said, the rest was history. We kind of went on a really serious run, and I felt like I had a lot of impact in terms of coming from Hawthorn at that point, bringing across their defensive structure. I felt really comfortable in helping Ross implement his. And so at that point, our defensive system was as good as anyone's. And so I think that's what really helped integrate me really quickly.
At the end of that year, obviously, St Kilda played Collingwood in a qualifying final, and you got, I guess, a bit of a chance at revenge on Anthony Rocca, and I think you probably kept him to 5 or 6 touches and just 1 or 2 goals. Was there a moment during that season or that game or over that period that you kind of felt like you finally, you were vindicated in making that decision? You were finally comfortable at the level?
I'd like to say yes, but probably not. I don't think I ever felt comfortable for one game in my career. I always felt like I didn't want to let myself feel comfortable, but I also never... I always knew that there was areas for growth, and I always knew my deficiencies as a player. So I just focused on really making sure that I was the best teammate as I could be, and supporting the guys around me and trying to make my teammates the best player on the ground every week. And that was my main focus every single week. And I think that's what really helped me stay in the team and form a really close bond with the guys I was playing with. But yeah, moments like that when you get a little bit of redemption on guys that, especially as a fullback, guys that may have beaten you in the past. Steve Silvagni was really, really big on that, like not letting him beat you 2 times in a row, not letting him beat you the same way, learning your lessons and growing. And so those moments were really important, that, you know, to feel like you were growing, that, you know, someone kicks 3 or 4 on you the next week or the next time you play them, you make sure that it's 1 or 2, you know, whatever it is, just make sure you're having little wins along the way. But he was, as good as he was, like, he was really big in terms of really shaping my mental state in those first few years.
Speaking of kicking goals, you, as you said, you're recruited as a forward ruckman and didn't kick a lot of goals yourself over your career, but you had one particular Monday night early on for the club that you've snuck down the forward line and managed to kick the sealer.
Yeah.
What was his rage behind leaving the back line and going and sneaking down and pinching the win for us?
I think it was at that point, Carlton were quite a small team, a small forward line, and I think they'd gone really small to try and use that to their advantage at that point, because I think we had a pretty tall back line with Chips and Blakey and myself, and we got to the last quarter, and Rossi, I got the message, and Rossi decided he wanted to swing me forward and try and pinch hit, and because I think I really enjoyed when we do train together with the forwards and the backs, or if we were as the backs and you pretend to be a forward. I used to love being able to play as a forward just for 20 seconds, you know, and kick a goal on Blakey or kick a goal on Gilbo. Like, that was, get a lot of pleasure out of it. And so Rossi knew that, and he knew that I was, and got drafted as a forward there, had a history there, and he got the call to go down there and just try and make a contest and try and make something happen. And just happened to, I literally went to push. I was playing on Michael Jamison, who was a really good defender at the time, and he wasn't really expecting it. And I gave him a real big push in the chest, and he's kind of slipped on his back foot, slipped over, and left me 10 meters clear. I think it might have been Schneid's or Mini, hit me right on the tit, about 40 out, and never looked like missing at that point.
Wobbled it through.
No, that was one of I knew straight away. That was one of the ones that I kicked, and I'm like, yep, that was done. That was in.
Underrated game of footy too. It's actually all on YouTube. It's one of the best games.
Yeah, it was a great game.
Game against Carlton. It was a belter. But that grand final that we've asked a lot of questions about the game. I guess there's a key moment that everybody knows about where you were obviously millimetres off being one of the great heroes with a tremendous intercept, and if not for the toepoke, obviously it would have turned out that way. But on a side note, how crook were you before that game? As I understand it, you'd been quite under the weather leading into that game.
Yeah, I was in a really bad way, actually. The night before, afternoon, and the night before, in the morning. I hadn't eaten a thing since lunch the day before at the parade. Wasn't able to keep anything down, fluids or solids. Was on the drip the night before, up until midnight. Got up at 6 a.m. at the club again till 9, and then at the ground. So I was really touch and go whether I was actually going to play or not. And you had a pretty serious convo with Ross right before the game. And he pretty much said, make the right effing decision, because this is going to, make or break a friendship if you don't. So if I wasn't feeling shit before that, I was feeling pretty nervous after that, to make sure. But in saying that, once I went and warmed up on the field and I kind of got that adrenaline, and I didn't really think about it, and it didn't really hit me until probably 3 days into drinking after the game.
Probably helped the guts.
It wasn't ideal, but it was. I was in a pretty bad way, but to be honest, I didn't really feel it too much during the game. As weird as it is, like you think that if you had no fuel in your body, but sometimes your body just finds a way, and there's more. Ross would always say you've got more to give than you think. So that was very true that day.
I guess without harping too much on that moment, which I'm sure you've spoken about, endlessly over the last decade or so, but do you have to remind people that to even get to that point, you had to sprint, 40 or 50 or 60 meters, kind of gut run to get to Gary Ablett Jr. to spoil that contest, even before Scarlett even gets to the ball. Do you feel like you're unfairly maligned in that moment?
Oh well, that was what I was proud of more than anything throughout my whole career, is that I was always willing to do that. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you don't get there. Sometimes, but I was always willing to help Jonesy if his man spat out. I'd come off my man and I put myself at risk to look like an idiot, and it could have backfired, But as I said, that defensive system that I was really comfortable with, I would always back my judgment to get to those sort of contests throughout the year, and make sure, even if it's just making them earn a mark, or just getting a knee in or getting some body on them, I would always love to be able to make an impact that way, and not just be a cone which is sitting in the middle and come off too late and let them hit it over the top, or just make an impact, whether you give a free kick away or whether whatever, you just stop the momentum of the ball and the play at the time. And throughout that whole year, that was something I really was proud of, my growth in that area. And so I was so confident in the moment that I never really had an issue. I never felt worried that I was doing the wrong thing. And I if it hadn't have been wet, I think, as I said, things would have been a lot different, because when I got there, I knew that if I had taken the body on Gary, I would have probably given away a free kick, because I got there just a little bit too late, and I knew that if I had cleaned him up, I would have given away a free. So I tried to go around his body without touching him, and because I had to go around him, I just got a glance on that ball, and I didn't get as firm a purchase on it. But the decision in itself, I'd do it 100 times out of 100 if I had to do it again. As you said, you're an inch away from being a hero in a game, which I'm very proud of. I took the risk and didn't think twice about it. So that, as I said, like, look back on those moments and be proud of the decision that you make, not one that you didn't make. Because if I didn't go and we lose the game, we'd be sitting here and you wouldn't know anything about it, but I would know that I didn't go for it. So that's what I'm proud of.
They've had a number of players from that era coming on here before and giving us what they did, how they've dealt with it, and everything like that. Was there anything you took from that into the following season, going, this is what I'm going to do different, I'm taking this and trying to make that better, or I'm forgetting that, not doing that anymore? Is anything that you changed and thought this is what's going to take?
Well, just going through that moment and knowing that I was in that moment and I could have made a difference and I could have won us the game, and I put myself in that situation, I took a lot of confidence out of that into the next year, that, if that situation was there again, I'm going to make the right decision, and I'm the right I should be on the ground. And I took confidence that I deserved my spot in that team, because I knew that I was willing to do what it took to make the hard decision, to go, when I could be made to look like an idiot. So that was probably the one thing I took out of that game, is that I belonged in that team, because, as you said, I wasn't the most pretty player, or didn't get the most Supercoach points or whatever, but I knew that my role in the team was just as important as the next person.
I guess from my point of view, over your time, I think looking at the statistics, I don't think you conceded more than 3 goals in a game at any stage in your time with the Saints. I guess, how proud are you? I know you obviously went on to Fremantle and had some success there as well with Ross. How proud of you of the transformation, and also the fact that when we talk about those finals, 9, 10 and even 11, everyone remembers obviously Goddard with the mark and Lenny Hayes with the Norm Smith. And when people say, St Kilda's finest players in those grand finals, they probably think of Hayes and Goddard. But I think our best 3 players were Hayes, Goddard and yourself over those grand finals. You beat your opponent the whole way through that period. And how proud are you of that finals record and how good you were in those big games?
Yeah, it was something that really gave me confidence when I left Saints to go to Freo. And we got into the finals run at Freo. That confidence that I took from those couple of years was really important for me to feel like I had a lot of experience and knowledge to share in those moments, because once you perform in the bigger moments, in finals games, that's when your real confidence grows as a player. Is it when the heat's really on and when the pressure's really on and every decision is so important. And if you're more often than not getting those decisions right and you're performing when the brightest lights are on, you're never going to gain more confidence in yourself and your own ability. And really looking back on things and people that still might be malign me in the way I played, I look back on that period of my career. And as you said, the record that I had in finals, and I've got no concern when people talk crap to me, because it's like, I've done it, I've performed when I needed to perform. I may have made a few errors and skill errors or whatever, but as a whole, I performed when it counted most.
Across the kind of 2010, 2011 period, there were obviously some well-documented incidents, and I'm not sure how comfortable you are talking about some of those things, but there's one that is potentially not spoken about a lot, and that's a tweet that you kind of directed at Robert Walls and called him a sourpuss. What's the story behind that?
It was probably, how long? It was probably 7 years of pent-up anger being released. It's probably immature, but as you said, like going to games and copying it from crowd is one thing, but then watching games back on TV and hearing commentators give it to you week in, week out, it really kind of grinds your gears, because it's like, you should understand how hard it is to play footy. You should understand the pressures that come with it. Yet you can sit there and go, oh, Zac, and my fault. He always does that. And it's just continual. Whereas I have to hear it from my parents, my aunties and uncles, my cousins talking about Robert Walls, and I'm like, I've had enough, and it got to the point where, I think it was like Channel 7 lost the rights to footy or something, and I was going to Bali at that point, and I literally sent that tweet and left to Bali that day and turned my phone off. And had no idea what had happened until 3 days later, when I turned my phone back on and I had like 80 messages from people saying, "What have you done?" So I literally sent it without thinking like there'd be any kickback, or I didn't really think it was too harsh, or I didn't even know if anyone would read it, to be honest. And to think that's what happened I look back and it's pretty funny now, but you just got to be careful sometimes, itchy fingers.
I have a two-parter. So when Ross decided to leave and he was heading over to Fremantle, was it early on the kind of maybe said something to you about coming and following as well, or going over with him? And the second part is, have you moved out of his house yet, or is it you still living with him? Or
I'm in the granny flat at the moment, so it's nice and cozy back here. No, well, it's a funny story because everyone thinks that I went with Ross. But to be honest, Freo had contacted me during that year, knowing that I was out of contract, and I was obviously comfortable where I was. I was really happy and content, and finally cemented my spot in the team. And I was like, "There's no way I'm going," so I just dismissed it and didn't think anything of it. And then got to the end of the year that year, and was looking to redo my contract and all that sort of thing. And so I went back into contract negotiations, and unfortunately at that point we'd had a lot of salary cap issues, and it meant that it was probably 6 or 7 players, like I think Shawnee Dempster, myself, Farron, I can't remember, and we were all having to take a little bit of a pay cut to be able to squeeze in. And at that point, I played 3 years, and as I mentioned before, like I thought after 3 years of consistent footy that this next contract was going to be my kind of make the bank, be able to set my life up, be able to buy a house, and got to that point, and it was almost the opposite. It was like, you've got to take less than you were on last year so you can stay. And I was like I felt like I was an important cog in the team, and just wanted to feel like that was being reflected in what I was going to be earning and all that sort of thing. And I really was really struggling to understand how it got to that point. And then during all that, my manager was like, well, he goes, you know that Freo was still in the picture. And I said, well, why don't we just speak to them and see if there's a deal and see if we can kind of use that as a bit of leverage with the Saints and say, well, you know, we have something going on. This is what I can get paid here. And that was my initial thought. And so we did that, came back and there was a deal there. They didn't talk about numbers. They said it was going to be pretty decent and we'd be able to do 3 or 4 years. And so I went back with that. And I think they might have thought I was bluffing, and they increased my contract by, I can't remember how much it was, but almost laughable at that point. It was insulting, really. And I walked out of the meeting and I said, no, I'm done with that. I felt disrespected and hadn't made a decision yet. But then literally within days, Ross left. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And so I hadn't decided any way or the other way. And so when that happened, I was like, gee, what's happening? My head was spinning. And then within a couple of days, Ross rang me and he's like, have you made a decision yet? Because they've been asking me about you. And once that happened and I had a conversation with him and he was like, we could, do something special over here. And, I've got faith in you and blah, blah, blah. It was just like, he gave me my first, showed belief in me. And he was kind of like the guy that reignited that fire in me. And so it was very hard to not go and follow when I knew that that's what I was going to be getting when I got there. When it was Scott Waters that was just been hired, I think it was at that time. And that was, it was very tough because I built great relationships with my teammates. I still love them to this day. And so it was a very hard call. And I just met my wife now. We'd met 9 months earlier. So it meant that I was going to have to leave Melbourne and my family. And it wasn't an easy decision, but, after probably a month, of really dwelling on it and thinking about it, that I made the call to go.
Zac, last one for me is it's a bit of a two-parter before we let you go, but you've spoken previously in media and interviews and stuff about mental health and the effect that being out in public and at events and nightclubs or bars, pubs, whatever, can have on you and the effect that has on your family and friends and other footballers, etc. Is there a message that you've got as someone who's kind of been through the darkest of that and the worst of that you want to, I guess, tell the footy public? And secondly, what do you want the footy community to know about Zac Dawson and how do you want to be remembered by Saints fans?
Well, I'll answer the last question first, how I want to be remembered. I just want to be remembered as someone that gave everything, that was limited in my ability, but I gave everything in terms of heart and effort to make up for that. I was selfless as a player, was more than willing to give up my own game to benefit my teammates. And that, more than anything, is something I want to be remembered for, especially within my teammates group, is just being a great teammate. And that was my mantra my whole career is to be a great teammate. And I got to my final year at Fremantle and I won the best clubman. And that was one of my prouder moments in my career, because I knew that the time and effort I was putting in with my teammates, it was being acknowledged, and especially even the administration staff, and because that was something I always did, and whether it was at St Kilda, Hawthorn, Freo, I'd always give time to every single person, and that's probably how I'd want to be remembered, as someone that's a great team man and a great team person, and someone that would want to be welcomed in any locker room. And that's how I felt, even coming back to St Kilda games in the last couple of years. I've felt welcomed because I felt like I put in a lot of effort in terms of my relationships with the club. So that's something that I really pride myself on, and still to this day, like in business, in life, in uni, like relationships is something I always will focus on, and having genuine relationships that way. And in terms of the mental health side of things, It's looking back on it, it's very lucky that I think I came out the other side. I think if I didn't go back into footy, and I always was carrying around the stigma, the Anthony Rocca, getting belted up as a young kid and blah, blah, blah. And I never had a chance to change that perception, and change my own belief in myself. Who knows where my life would have gone? And that's the real worry, with the mental health side of things, that I wasn't willing to ask for help. I thought I could deal with it. I didn't want to worry my parents. I didn't want to worry my friends. So I kind of bottled it all up. And it probably wasn't till the back end of my career where I started talking about things and that you really understand that the enormity of how serious things get and how seriously bad things could have gone, if I didn't get myself into a better headspace. Because it is damaging. Like living your life, and people, all they see is your super coach points, or all they see is someone's kicked 8 goals on you in your 3rd game, and they think they talk about, people insult your family, they'll get on your Facebook and they'll send you disgraceful messages about your kids, and they think that this is all right, and it's all based on a game of footy. They don't know me as a person. They don't know me, the relationship, as you said, like how proud I am of the relationships I have with most people that I interact with. That's more important to me than anything. So I got myself to a point at the end of my career where the people that were giving this crap to me, I almost felt sorry for them more than I got angry. I was like, because I would always think, well, what's going on in your life for you to be sitting there on your keyboard or sitting there at the ground heckling me? And so I would turn it around, and rather than be angry and be upset, I'd be like, well, I'd almost feel sorry for them and go, well, I wonder what's happening in their life, because things must be pretty bad if that's how they're getting gratification. Then that's quite sad. And so for young players, and that would be my one bit of advice, is that it's how you take that hate and how you take the haters and what they're saying. If you take it personally, it's going to wear you down eventually. But if you turn that into, motivation, or you turn it into, you're feeling sorry for these people and kind of not letting it get to you, I think that was the biggest thing for me, to be able to move forward and not kind of dwell on the past.
Very good answer, and it's been great to spend some time with you this evening, Zac. We appreciate you jumping on. You played some terrific footy for the Saints. I think it was a great story of redemption for the club and redemption for yourself, and obviously you went on to continue to have a fine career. So good luck with whatever does happen next, and thanks very much for being our latest guest.
No, absolute pleasure. Anytime.